Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Bible Worm. We recently passed something of a podcasting milestone with our 100,000th download. To celebrate, we're re-releasing our very first podcast episode from September of 2019, back when we were still in LDR. First, I talk with Amy for a few minutes about our experience of creating Bible Worm, and then we share that episode. It's not great, y'all, but at least we can celebrate how far we've come. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, so we're getting ready to celebrate our 100,000th download of the Bible Worm podcast. Can you believe that?
I honestly cannot. That is really very crazy. That's crazy.
It's really crazy. Yeah, when we started out, we were just hoping that our moms would listen to us or something. I don't think either one of our moms probably actually listened
Bobby,
to us.
honestly, when we started out, I was just looking forward to having a reason to have a conversation with you once a week about biblical text. And people listening helps me because it raises the bar and makes me actually get off the couch instead of eating cookie dough in my pajamas and turn on a recording device. But the reward was always in that for me. So the fact that 100,000 times individuals have found it worthwhile to download our episodes is unbelievable.
Amazing.
It's wonderful.
I was going to ask you, so for our 100,000th download, I'm going to re-release our very first podcast, the Genesis 1 from 2019. Yeah, with all the bad sound and everything. I just wanted to ask you what you remember about getting started. You said we did it because we wanted to. I mean, it was my New Year's resolution in 2019 was I wanted to talk to you more because you're important to me, and we sort of lost touch for a while. And so that was my initial motivation was I just want to talk to Amy. But I was just curious, do you remember? What do you remember about how we decided to start the podcast?
I remember I was in an administrative role at a synagogue. I was an executive director, which is a really important role, but not a really Jewish role. I don't know how to say it. My cup was not being filled just by that work. And I had resolved that I was going to look for more opportunities to write. But writing is lonely. Thinking is fun, but writing is lonely.
Yeah.
And then you asked me if I wanted to do this together with you. And I mean, asked me on a Thursday and we recorded it on Sunday?
Something like that, yeah. I can't remember the time exactly.
I have no idea what we were doing. But it just was such a, I don't know, it was such a gift to me. It still is such a gift to me to have this space to think and be sort of playful and strange and real and serious. And I don't know, this space still feels so alive to me, and I never know what kind of nonsense might happen during our conversations.
Yeah. My recollection of that conversation, in my head, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot at Hendrix, right behind my building, and I was August of 2019, and I don't know what we were talking about. And I think it was a Monday maybe. And I said, I decided we should do a podcast together. And you were like, okay. And then we really did. We recorded on a Friday and released it on a Sunday. And when you listen to the episode,
you can tell.
You can tell. I did not know anything about sound. I didn't know how to edit anything. You, as I recall, did not wear headphones when we had that conversation. And so it's you can hear me echoing back through there. Mm-hmm. It was not great. But I remember, I don't know, probably a couple hundred people listened to that podcast, and we got some positive feedback, and I felt so encouraged about it. And I was like, oh wow, this is actually useful for some folks, and I get to talk to you. And so back then we were in LDR.
I was so nervous. That's right. We were NLDR. Mm-hmm. The joke that nobody would get.
Nobody got it. Some people got the NL and some people got the DR, but there was 3 people who understood the whole. But those are 3 very special people.
They're our favorite people.
Yeah. Anyway, so I appreciate your coming along on this podcasting journey with me. I love talking to you every week, and I love wrestling over these texts and just kind of thinking about text and life and trying to have a little bit of a commitment to justice and also a sense of humor about things. I have appreciated working with you.
I've loved working with you too, Bobby. And okay, this I'm just asking off the cuff. Do you have a favorite moment or episode that comes to mind?
I thought about, and then I just decided this was too much work in that way that, like, part of my approach to Bible Worm has been like, what's the best thing we can do for the minimal amount of work? That's been sort of the bar for me. Mm-hmm. I thought about doing like you know how like special episodes with clips from the past, like they do on sitcoms or whatever. Uh-huh. I thought about doing one of those.
That would be awesome.
Maybe we'll do one sometime, but I couldn't pull it together for this. But the very first thing that always comes to mind for me is our first year podcast on Isaiah 40, when you proposed the idea of doing hand puppets to separate the voices. The grass withers, the flower fades, but
I still remember the room I was sitting in when we did that, because you were like, wait, you want to do what now?
Well, grass withers.
You're like a good idea in my head.
No, it totally worked. Like that transformed my understanding of that text. Like it was beautiful. And I actually, the other day, a local person who listens to the podcast asked me when we're going to do the Bible Worm puppet show. So I think we could actually take it on the road if we wanted to.
That's a good idea.
What about you? Do you have a favorite moment? Favorite episode?
I have this silly moment that stands out to me. It's so silly, but I remember I was listening to this episode probably because I was preparing to teach on the text, and you and I descended into such a land of laughter that, like, I was on a walk and I had to stop on the side of the road because I was laughing so hard. I think I was talking, I don't know if I was New Testament, we're talking about communion, or maybe we're talking about the Passover sacrifice. I was trying to bring in this like ritual theory idea of how sharing food creates an existential connection between two people, because this thing that was once one, like one animal or one loaf of bread or whatever, now is like making up the atoms of individual people. Yeah. It was a very like serious and profound, very profound moment. But somehow I tied it to like trying to eat the leftovers from like the boy I had a crush on in middle school because he had eaten some of it. And you were like off to the races. You were like, we're going to talk about this for 20 minutes now, and I have a lot of follow-up questions. And that's pretty much what the podcast episode was about after that. What was the matter with middle school Amy?
You stole food off of his plate or something? Like after he left the table?
Well, you embellished the story. I think I just tried to drink out of soda cans he drank out of.
Oh, okay.
But when you told it, I was like eating his potatoes, which made it much funnier.
Yeah. So I have decided that I don't know, maybe it'll be for our 200,000th download, but I've decided we're going to do a special episode. Oh, it could be like I don't know. Sometime we're going to do one where I go back and get clips from all our old podcasts. Probably no one will want to listen to that. Yeah. But we can listen to it. And we can think it's hilarious.
And we can make a little video of our friendship through the years.
Oh, that would be so nice.
The years, you never let me down. Yeah, it's going to be great.
A friend's a friend forever. No, that's not the one.
We'll sing the whole soundtrack. This has been a good conversation, Bobby. Thank you.
It has been a good conversation. So we just want to say thanks to everybody who listens to the podcast every week, or even if you only listen once in a while. It gives us a good excuse to read texts together and to talk to each other and to keep our friendship up. And we're grateful that it's been meaningful to some folks out there.
Very, very grateful. L'chaim, here's to the next 100,000.
Yes, and enjoy this look back on our first episode of NLDR.
God help us.
Welcome to the very first episode of NLDR, the Narrative Lectionary podcast for people on the go. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson. This week I sat down with my co-host, Dr. Amy Robertson, to discuss the creation story in Genesis 2, 4 through 25. As biblical scholars, we talked about some of the curious details of this text, the way it portrays God and the creation of human beings, our relationship to plants, animals, and the earth. As faith practitioners, we talk about how we think this text might have relevance to our own communities of faith. We hope you'll enjoy our conversation. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Bobby. This is Amy. Do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Amy Robertson. I am, in my daily life, the executive director of a Reconstructionist synagogue in Atlanta. The synagogue was founded by the gay and lesbian community, but I myself am a straight, cis, married, white woman. I'm Jewish, but I'm just me. I don't claim to represent the views of anyone other than myself. I'm a parent. I have 2 kids. I have a teenager and a tween, and that informs a lot of my thinking about life in general these days.
I'm a Bible scholar at Hendrix College in Conway, Arkansas, just outside of Little Rock. We're a United Methodist affiliated school, but I myself am a Presbyterian. I'm ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA. My daily faith community is a little church in Little Rock called Mercy Community Church, which mostly our members are people who live on the street, homeless or housing unstable folks. And so that informs the way that I come to the text as well. So our text for this week, starting out, is Genesis chapter 2, starting with verse 4b. This in the Bible is the second story of creation. So in Genesis chapter 1, we just had the God said, "Let there be light," and there was light story. And this chapter seems to kind of reset the story of creation a little bit. So beginning in chapter 2, verse 4, I'm reading the New Revised Standard Version. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was no one to till the ground. But a stream would rise from the earth and water the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. So why don't we stop just right there at verse 8. In listening to that text, Amy, what kinds of things are standing out to you as important?
I think what's really at the front of my mind is how different this story is than the creation story that we just read in Genesis 1, where there's an abundance of water. There's so much water. Water's the problem, like separating the water above from the water below. And then we're separating the skies from the oceans, and then we're separating the water on earth so there can be dry land. And in this story, it seems to be a problem that there's been no rain, and that's why nothing's growing, because there's a lack of water, which just sort of underscores for me how different these two perspectives on creation are. And then the other part of it is just this sort of like intimacy of the idea that God breathed life into the nostrils of a human and then made a little garden for the human. It's like going to the pet store and getting like a terrarium for your lizard. There's this sort of it's so different than the first creation story, which is so like this grand cathedral of creation, and this is like a little like sweet terrarium.
One of the things, where you finished up there, one of the things that's always interesting to me in this text is it seems like what God really wants is a garden, right? The problem is there's no one to tend the garden. So I can't plant the garden unless there's someone to tend it. So first I'm going to create somebody to work the garden, and then I can plant the garden. So human beings, in my reading of this text, are almost secondary to the garden itself, which is kind of an interesting perspective. If we tend to read the Bible as kind of the Bible is all about us. But here, to me, it seems that the creation is really the point, and we're useful in as much as we're able to take care of the creation. But the creation is really the thing that God is kind of after. You mentioned the word intimacy and that breathing of breath. And one of the other things that stands out to me in this text is that
that verb, the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground. Mm-hmm. That verb form, in Hebrew is yatsar. The noun form yotzer means a potter. And so this verb yatsar means to form like in kind of an artistic way, or God's functioning like a potter or like a sculptor, in this kind of intimate, like hands are in the dirt, forming in this kind of artistic fashion, this human being that then receives the breath of life. Like it's just this beautiful idea of kind of an artistic God who's intimately connected to human beings through that breath. So we should probably also mention that relationship that you can't see in English, but you see it in Hebrew, of the word. This translation is man, but the word in Hebrew is probably better translated as human. But the word Adam, which is related, of course, to the Hebrew Adamah for ground. So the Adam comes from the Adamah, the groundling comes from the ground. And I remember our old professor, John Hayes, used to say, if you want to capture the image in English, instead of calling the first human Adam, you would call him Dusty, right? Because he's made up of dust. The name reminds us that we are dirt, right? So then verse 9, out of the ground the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So now that God has the garden in place, or the human in place, that we can plant the garden. And so there's all of these trees, there's everything that's pleasant and good for food, and then these two trees that are named, the tree of life and then the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which we know, if we've read before, is going to become a problem in the next chapter.
It's just so strange to have God place Adam in this garden with these, with these trees and say, don't touch that one. Like, do you really expect that they're not going to touch that one? It's strange.
It is strange. We'll come back to that. So this next little section of this text, I have no idea what to do with it. And most often I skip over it, but it's there. And so we ought to talk about it. And I'm curious what you make of it. Mm-hmm. So in verse 10, a river flows out of Eden to water the garden. And from there it divides and becomes 4 branches. The name of the first is the Pishon. It is the one that flows around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. The name of the second river is Gihon. It is the one that flows around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates.
I mean, what I first make of that is I like the locatedness and sort of specificity of it. I mean, it really, in both creation stories, sort of the attention to loving the details of the story and sort of the importance of that, like, concreteness about it. And then, of course, I read some commentaries, and they say nobody knows where this garden is supposed to be based on the description. So was this really a place, and we just don't know where it is? I don't know. But just reading it as a narrative, I like the locatedness of it. I think that matters. I think it matters where we live and the surroundings that we have and the specifics of the place that we care for and interact with.
One thing that is sticking out to me here is that it's the water that flows out of the garden that then becomes these 4 rivers. So sometimes I've read it as like the garden is located somewhere among these, like in the midst of these 4 rivers. But it's actually the garden produces these 4 rivers. And so the Tigris and the Euphrates, is Mesopotamia, kind of one of the birthplaces of human civilization. And Cush is East Africa, maybe Ethiopia. And so there's this sense of like all the life in the world is flowing out of this little garden. We don't know where the garden is, but we know that what emerges from it is life that gives life to the whole of this located world you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So in verse 15, then, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, you may freely eat of every tree of the garden, But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat it, you shall die. There's a fairly clear purpose there first for the human being. Like the human's job is to till the earth and to keep it, to be a gardener. That's our kind of fundamental role in life. And then we get that strange, what you were talking about earlier, this, here's the tree, don't touch it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was reading about this a little bit the other day and sort of asking questions like, what do we mean by knowledge of good and bad? What do we mean by good and bad? Like, what is this actually sort of claiming? I read some commentators who thought good and bad could be sort of weal and woe, but that you will know the totality. You will be familiar with, you'll become acquainted with the totality of what we now would say is the human experience, which is weal and woe, which is, great joy and great suffering. It's not so much that there's like, they're trying to become omnipotent or there's sort of like a power play involved. It's sort of that there's a choice on the table. You can stay in this garden the way it is, or you can know more of the totality of experience and it's going to have highs and lows. Now, of course, God doesn't say you have a choice. God says, don't do it. But then God also puts it in the garden. So
one of the things that I can't even remember who said this to me, but the Bible makes more sense if you read it backwards. So instead of saying, why would God have done this? Mm-hmm. The question could be, why would a human being have written a story about God this way? Mm-hmm. And so along the lines, I think, of what you were saying is there is this sense in which, human experience has tragic components to it. There is woe along with the weal, and at some level, it's about the knowledge that we have, and maybe even about moral discernment, about being able to know if what we're doing is good or bad, and how to manipulate good and bad. There's this sense in which human beings in this story weren't created to have that kind of knowledge. We were to be more like, not exactly like squirrels, but like kind of like squirrels. Like we were supposed to be these innocent creatures with no sense of shame and no attempt to manipulate and deceive. We were just going to be like, the greatest of the animals, but we were still going to be an animal. But then we have this knowledge that separates us, this kind of self-awareness or self-consciousness of ourselves as creatures who have moral capacity, who will die, like who can think about things beyond the current moment. And this text has a sense that maybe like that's a complicated thing to be. So one way that I've read this story is like it's trying to deal with the complexity of human experience, of like knowing more than we really ought to know. Like we know stuff that gets us in trouble. And this text is one way of talking about that, maybe.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And I think that I can think of several examples of things that I've heard called sort of a club that nobody wants to be a part of, right? You go through some tragedy in your life, and the only people who seem to really understand your situation and be able to help you with it are other people who have been through it. And that's really what gets you through, is that sort of formation of community around that tragedy. And so as you were talking about like knowledge that we're not supposed to have, some of it is the knowledge that you get through those experiences. And it's interesting to think about, why would someone write this perspective of why God put this tree in the garden and created humans in this way? And it does sort of offer one reflection on the question of why there is that suffering. Like maybe it wasn't God's choice that we suffer in that, but humans chose the full range of experience. And so we're going to have the full range.
I like that. Okay, so at this point in the story, what we have is a garden with all of these trees that are delicious to eat, with these two special trees, the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. And then we have one human creature, and that's everything that there is, and these rivers. So then the rest of creation comes starting in this next verse, 18. The Lord God said, "It's not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner." So out of the ground, the Lord God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all cattle and to the birds of the air and to every animal of the field. But for the man there was not found a helper as his partner. So I just want to stop there because other things are getting ready to happen. But what do you make of that part of the story about how animals are created and where they come from?
It's a really good question. I think I have always gotten so hung up on the sort of role of women and the heteronormativity of the story in general. Kind of glossed over the animals entirely. Yeah. The animals were in there. I don't know what you make of the animals, Bobby.
Well, so, I mean, this part fascinates me. And part of it's, so, like, it really seems like God's plan is that this human being ought to have a companion, and maybe that companion is going to be, like a fish. Like a fish of some kind, right? So God is God is sort of improvising right here. Like, God has discovered, like, oh, it's not good for humans to be alone. So what can we do about that? And so just like creating things and bringing them, right? And so this God
see what sticks,
Yeah, exactly. Like, here's a wallaby, like, what do you think about that? The human's like, oh, that seems okay, but like not really a partner.
Right. It's not really like a partner.
Yeah. Here's a cow, here's a muskrat, here's a dung beetle. And so God's just like bringing all these things. I mean, I think is genuinely a little surprised that they aren't suitable companions. I don't know. That's just the way I read the story. Because if God knew, like at the end, none of these are going to be suitable, then like we could have kind of skipped.
Why not skip that part?
To the end, right? Yeah. So it's interesting to me, and when you think about the relationship of humans and the other animals, that they were created to be companions for us, and in some sense, they do function that way, but they're not. The Hebrew is a partner corresponding to you or something like that. Mm-hmm. So these other animals aren't companions in that sense of like complementary beings or beings who are equal to us and can be partners in the task of life. One thing that also gets lost sometimes in the English is it calls the animals living creatures. And earlier, when God created the human, in verse 6, it says the man became a living being. And so in the English, in the NRSV anyway, living being is the human and living creature is the animal, which sounds like they're just different from each other. But the Hebrew for both is nefesh chaya, which means a living being, right? A living soul or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so it's calling human beings and animals by the same name, like we are of the same kind.
What's interesting to me too is you pointed out before that, the human is sort of created in order for a garden to be created.
Right.
Because the garden needs a keeper. And then the animals are created to keep the human company.
Yeah.
So that sets up a really interesting sort of, I don't know the right word to use, but sort of what was sort of primary in the plan of creation and how different things are interdependent and responsible for one another. Yeah, the humans are not responsible for the animals. The animals are.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. There. So in some sense, the human being is to tend the garden and the animals are to be companions for the human.
Or to entertain the human being.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is really different than Genesis 1, where human beings are
really different
over every living thing.
Yeah. Although humans do get to name the animals.
That is true.
And so I've wondered about what is the sort of significance of that? Like what is in terms of dominance?
Mm-hmm. I think clearly the humans aren't just an animal among animals in this text. Yeah. I think none of the other animals are judged to be kind of worthy partners in this task of gardening. All right, so then we come to the next piece of the text, which you are leading us toward. So what has just happened is for the man there was not found a helper as his partner. So in verse 21, the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then God took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Then the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken. Therefore, a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." All right, you clearly had some thoughts about this part of the text.
So I will tell you my first thought, and then I have sort of stepped myself back from that thought a little bit. But my first thought was like, this is some like bizarre utopian fantasy of a man who wants a partner who actually is himself. And so he doesn't actually have to deal with anything that's at all different from himself. Now he can look in the mirror and talk to his, reflection, and he doesn't actually have to, live in a relationship.
Right. Yeah.
Which is probably not what they were going for in this story. But again, sort of looking at who do we think was writing this story? Sure. To what extent do things need to be taken should things be taken literally? And to what extent do I just read it as human instead of man creating woman, more sort of like human and partnered human? I do think I still think it's like a utopian fantasy of what intimate relationships are like. And I have more concern for what it for the heteronormativity of the story than for the role of women versus men.
Yeah.
In the story.
Let's come back to that, because that ending about the story turns out to have been kind of an etiology and an origin story for where marriage comes from. And so let's come back to that in just a second. I really like where you're kind of headed with this conversation about the relationship of male and female in this text. And I think you're kind of gesturing toward an understanding of this text in which that first creature who was created at the beginning, who was called Adam, the human, may not have been a biological male, but may have been kind of an ungendered or multi-gendered, however you want to think, human being. This was pretty famously argued by Phyllis Tribble in God and the Rhetoric of Sexuality, but it's actually quite an ancient interpretation in the Jewish interpretive tradition that the first creature was sort of a gender-neutral human. So if you understand the text that way, then instead of the traditional understanding, which I think has been something like man was created first and then woman was out of his rib, what you instead have is Ha'adam, the gender undifferentiated human, who upon the removal then becomes the Ish, the man, the biological male, and the Isha, the biological female. So from an ungendered human, then you get a division of gender. A traditional reading of this text has been because man was created first and woman is his helper, the biological male is the superior to the biological. And I think there is a reading of this text, and I think a good one, and maybe the best one, which doesn't lead to that at all, but instead there was a human. There was no other animal that was equal to that human, and so that human was just split into two.
Divided.
Yeah. The other thing is that word helper, like the word helper or helpmate, it's sometimes translated.
Yeah.
It sounds like a little like the junior partner, like Robin to the, the Adam's Batman or whatever.
Yeah.
But that word gets used throughout the Bible. The word Hebrew is azer, which gets used throughout the Bible and in the Psalms, especially, like even as a reference to God. And so the psalmist will cry out, "Oh Lord, helper," and that's the word, right? And so there's nothing inherent in that word that means like less than or like the apprentice or junior to. It just means sometimes we need help, and this is a creature who can help. And it can be used of a creature who is superior and not inferior.
I would add in there that the name Ezra, who, there's a book of Ezra later, but it's also a common Jewish name, is also help. There's nothing weak about the idea of being of that sort of Hebrew root. There's no weakness associated with that.
Yeah. Now, I want to hear your thoughts on the heteronormativity of the marriage kind of turn at the end. Therefore, a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh.
I mean, I think the interpretation you were referring to before, that the first human had no gender or all genders and then was divided in some way, is a helpful one. It's just not the dominant one that's sort of out there in the world. And so I feel like I spend more energy sort of resisting the dominant and somewhat crass idea that people of different sexes, bodies fit together in a certain way because there was this thing that happened where one body was removed from the other body. So mostly for me, I'm aware of the heteronormativity of it and would try to bring up interpretations like the one that you mentioned, to sort of expand people's ideas of what's possible in interpreting this passage. And again, I think of who I think the author was and what I imagine their lived experience probably was, and, sort of what we know now and how we can sort of expand upon the core messages and metaphors in the story to fit what we know about the world now.
There is this kind of gender, like you were mentioning, not just gender complementarity, but sexual complementarity.
Yeah.
Like things fit together. So the sexual union of male and female becomes a recombining of the primary.
Right, to this initial, yeah.
Yeah. I've read an interpretation, and right now I can't remember whose it is, but that was resisting that idea that this is about sexual complementarity and suggesting that it's more about the building of family units. And so it's not that male and female fit together sexually, it's that they fit together in ways that form functional family units that can continue on a family. And so a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife is about leaving one kind of set of relationships and beginning a new set of relationships. There's a way of reading that in which the genders of the people involved in the formation of the new family are kind of irrelevant. So if there's, same-sex unions or whatever it might be, that what matters is that people find partners and build lives with them. And there's continuity of community. As somebody who was single for a very long time in my life, I still kind of resist that interpretation because it suggests that you ought always...
That you're not whole somehow.
Right. Yeah, you ought always be part of some other kind of unit in order to be a full human. And I think that's not a helpful interpretation. All right, so we've done a lot of kind of digging into the text, and I think we've dug out some really interesting ideas. So my question is, once you have read this text as a scholar, what do you walk away with as seeming important to the living of this day in this time and place?
I get two. One is more dominant than the other, but so one that I just think is important to name is that even in Eden, where theoretically everything is all ideal and perfect and just how we'd want it to be and pretty easy, we haven't eaten from the tree yet, everything's easy, people still have a job. No, like that I feel like there's this fantasy now that like what life is really supposed to be is vacation.
Yeah.
But the issue of finding meaningful work that helps you feel connected to systems in which you exist, it's written into the plan. Like it's an important thing. And so figuring out the work piece, I think, is more important than we give it credit for. And the other thing for me is, I do think this is like a crazy utopian fantasy of what it's like to be in relationship with people. Especially, I don't know what your experience of being in community is, but I love community, but there's a lot of complicated peopling that happens, and community life is very complicated. But this passage sort of also reminds me of the the loneliness that can come, not from like being in an intimate partnership with one person or not, but how important that human to human connection is.
Yeah. Those are really great. The couple of things that were standing out to me, one was all the way back at the beginning. We were talking about how what God really wanted was a garden, and human beings' purpose was to tend the garden, to work and to till. And so when you think about a moment of environmental crisis, which we're in, to think that really part of that crisis is a disordering of the role of human beings relative to the created world, and that we have come to think that what matters is us and our access to resources and our ability to grow our economy year over year, and that whatever happens to creation is kind of not that important. And this story is trying to, I think, flipping those roles to say, no, the only reason that human beings have value, or at least the original value of human beings in this text, is because we tend well to creation. And so I think this text I'm reading is a call back to remembering that our role is to be stewards and gardeners, farmers, who make sure that the creation grows well. The other thing that I was thinking about with this text is the creation of human beings out of the dirt, and the fact that there is only one human being at the beginning. And whatever you think about that, like biologically, within the story, the claim is that we all descended from one common human ancestor. That is, we're all related. We're all part of this human family together. Even the people that we don't like or that we don't want to be a part of, we're connected to them. In the Mishnah, there's this saying, because we are all descended from one human being, if you kill any person, it is as though you killed the entire world. And if you save one person, it's as though you saved the entire world. And I think that's a really beautiful ancient Jewish interpretation of this text, and both sides of it, right? That the value of human life is really important, and one life is as valuable as all the lives. And the reciprocal of that is, it can seem overwhelming to try to care for every person who comes across our path, or to think like there are people out there that I'll never be able to help. But to remember that because we're all connected, if you can help the person in front of you, and I can help the person in front of me, that has the same value as being able to save everybody.
Yeah, no, I hear a lot of, I hear both of us sort of circling around these themes of sort of interdependence and sort of being part of a system and understanding how that system works. And there's such a pull in American culture towards like the individual and sort of every person for themselves. And it's really destructive. I mean, it really, it's destructive ultimately for our lives and our souls and our environment and all the sort of systems that we live within. And I think this text gets to a lot of that.
Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation with you about
Me too.
Yeah, I've learned so much. So thanks for being part of the conversation today, and I'll look forward to talking with you again next time.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Thanks for joining us for NLDR, the Narrative Lectionary Podcast for people on the go. Come back next week when we'll discuss Genesis 18 and 21. We'll see you then.